Hello and welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I'm Catherine Camp, your hostess for the show. This is where we dig into those difficult topics of our day in order to have conversations with the people around us, conversations that count, conversations with an eternal perspective. Today I have a returning guest, Lisa Ekman. I hope you all remember her. If you don't, you have to go back and listen to our first episode. She is an author. She is a gardener, and she is an ex-Democrat, which she has a lot to say about that, and that's in her book, and I hope you all go out and get that. But this gives you a chance to get to know her a little bit more, and what's going on, and how should we look at this from a biblical perspective, what's happening in our country, in our culture. So let me get her back on. I don't know why I have to define you as an ex-Democrat.
Oh, that's okay.
It's way out there.
Well, it gives a good perspective on where I have come from, and the change in where I am now. And I think just so if anyone listening didn't hear the first time I was on, to give a little bit more background just so they can kind of understand, I was not just a Democrat. I lived in Washington, D.C., and I worked as a Democratic advocate and lobbyist for 20 years. And so I have a very unique inside perspective on where they come from, how they got there, and really the programming, the brainwashing and indoctrination that is used to make them members of what I call the progressive cult. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason why I think that I'm a very good fit to talk to your listeners is that I became aware that it really is evil persuading people to believe and put their faith in the government instead of in God. And so when you do that, it puts all of our traditional values at risk, because all of those get attacked in order to make the receipt of faith be the government instead of the creator. So
what would you say to those people? And I know there are other things that I wanted to get to, but what would you say to those people who are clinging on to this ideology that they have of what they envisioned that the 1963 Democrat Party used to hold on to?
I would say that there's nothing wrong with those values. They're very different, though, than the values that are espoused by the modern Democratic Party. I would say that through propaganda, using mainstream media, using algorithms on Google and other search platforms, but especially Google, because the vast majority of internet searches occur there, using censorship, as we all saw during especially 2020, when people were conservatives were being deplatformed and debanked and shut down and called things like the disinformation dozen. So propaganda and censorship, and then add on to that the indoctrination that so many of the people on the left have gone through in school. The Democratic Party is not the big tent that it used to be. People who call themselves Democrats at this point have been radicalized and are now members of what I call the progressive cult. And I think censorship is a really good issue to kind of explain it to them. Back in those 60s, it was all about you do you and me do me, and everyone has a right to be heard, and the First Amendment meant everybody has a right to be heard. And in fact, the very purpose of the freedom of speech in the First Amendment is that government doesn't get to say what's true. Government doesn't get to declare what's right. That's up to each individual person. And back in the 60s, that 1963 Democrat you're talking about would agree with that wholeheartedly. And an organization that was designed to protect people's civil liberties, the American Civil Liberties Union, as a matter of fact, protected the right of Nazis to protest and to march for that very reason, because everyone's right to speak freely is only as secure as the right of the people to whose opinions you abhor and would wholeheartedly oppose. And, truth, even though I don't read the Washington Post, something is true that they say: truth dies in darkness. So if you don't allow those views to be expressed and people who know truth to counter them, then those ideas just fester and they become worse, and they are able to persuade more people when it's not out in the public. But back to what I was saying, the ACLU used to defend everyone's right to speak, and now they no longer do, because they are also captured by the progressive cult. So the party that I was always a member of no longer exists, and it has been captured by these radical progressives who are seeking to deconstruct the United States and put a communist government in its place. And so your values are not what has changed. Perhaps the party has, and that's what happened to me. I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. And the thing that also happened is that sort of like in any cult, you have to have ideological conformity, meaning that you have to toe the party line even if it's not what you agree with, or you will be excommunicated, you will be shunned, and in today's day and age, you will be canceled, you could be censored, you could be debanked and doxxed, and all of the things that the left loves to do to people now. And, abortion is a very good issue that I can speak to where they've done this. It used to be the party that you're talking about on the left was abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And now it is abortion is fine as long as the woman wants to have it, with absolutely no limits to be placed on it. And they'll argue with you about this, but this is very true, up to birth, up to birth. And that is just not the position that the party used to have. But you can no longer be a member of the cult if you want to hold that view. And even that, I would say, is, not the moral view to have. But it at least was what the view of the left was back in the time you're talking about. And now you cannot really be a Democrat and hold that view.
Yeah, and I've seen many books. I think books started to be written to revise history, because this didn't just happen in a vacuum. This was a slow, steady march to get to the point where we are today, where I feel like there's been a big unveiling of what they really are, and it's like a monster being unveiled. I've seen books like, the new Jim Crow laws, or the old Jim Crow laws, and bringing that, personally, I don't even know what that was until recently. And I just wonder if you have anything to say on historical revisionism that has happened, especially at the college level. And I know it's in the high school level as well in some states, with Howard Zinn rewriting history books.
I think that, that has definitely been happening. I think I tell this sort of anecdote often. In 1976, when we celebrated the bicentennial of our country, everyone was a patriot. Everybody waved flags. Everybody, you could recognize some of the challenges, the mistakes, some of the things that our country did that you might not agree with, but you still understood the beauty of the American experiment. The fact that no other country in history has ever had a First Amendment like we do. No other country has ever had a Second Amendment like we do. And that Democrats stood, liberals, as they would call themselves then, and now, as I am very clear to say, the left has been captured by the progressives. They're not liberal anymore. They're not classical liberals in that sense. But that now, if you are a patriot, you're a terrorist. You are, and it goes along with what I was saying about deconstruction and deconstructing the United States. basically, one of the biggest things you can do to undermine a culture and a civilization is to undermine what is real. What is reality? I mean, if you look at like George Orwell's 1984, that was the whole purpose of the Ministry of Truth. Language no longer means what it means. And so at the very basic level, they have been doing this. And here I can use gender ideology as a perfect example of that. And this is also, getting to the revisionism. It is that if you can no longer say what a woman is, then how can you possibly have keep faith to the role of a woman in Scripture? How could you possibly have the role of a family in Scripture, and then, or even in our cultural traditions? And now, if you talk to many young women, it would seem like being a wife and a mother and keeping a home and raising a family, and I would say that raising children to be good people is what you could do to have the biggest impact on the future of this planet. You can go do any job and be so important. Most of those jobs, your impact is not going to last beyond the time you get your last paycheck. But when you leave humans on this planet, you leave this impact. And you are also recognizing the gift that the Creator gave us as women to procreate, to create life, to bring more humans into being. And so when you undermine that, you could talk to these young women, and being a stay-at-home mom would be like a death sentence to them. And so you've revised history. You could talk to many older women who were stay-at-home moms, and they will tell you that it was extremely rewarding and it was extremely, fulfilling. And, they may have volunteered at church or other civic organizations, and they have an impact outside of their home as well. But they have revised history, and I'm just using this sort of as one example to get to what you're talking about, which completely undermines any traditional value, any patriotic culture, any religious foundation for ourselves, our country, and our children. So I think that this has happened in schools, when you pay more attention to a 5-year-old's pronouns than you do to the value of a nuclear family. You are rewriting history. All of these things have an impact on how history is viewed. And you look at something like the 1619 project, I believe it was, to change the date of foundation of our country. You're seeing that, and some schools actually did take up that curriculum. And so I think that a great disservice has been done by rewriting history, and it is part of the indoctrination, and it is part of what you would need to do in order to convince a big enough part of our population that everything needs to be torn down and we need to start again. And the only way to make it equal is to have socialism and communism.
Right. And what people don't realize is it's never going to be equal. I mean, Jesus said you will always have the poor. And they'll always be with you. I think it's in God's world, it's up to each individual to reach out to those in their sphere and help them if they are able, and if that Scripture says that. And there, in man's way of socialism and communism, there are people at the top managing all of this and telling others, you don't deserve this. So they're scooping big, it's like a bulldozer of cash in their own pockets. They don't live in small homes. They live in huge mansions, and everyone else is a pauper, and they distribute it as they please.
And that's a good a good point, Catherine, and I think, I kind of talk about this in the book, Deprogramming Democrats, is that what the left used to be for was equality, not equity. And there's a big difference. And I think really what it comes down to, the way that you're talking about it, we can never have equality of outcomes. You can give 7 people the same opportunities, and due to different traits, characteristics, abilities, they're going to have different outcomes. And that is okay. That is what the beauty of our differences are. You will never turn me into a painter. I'm not skilled at that. I shouldn't be a painter. You could create programs so that everybody would have to buy my art even if it wasn't good, but that isn't real equality. And equality of opportunity, in my opinion, pretty much exists in the United States. But what we're trying to achieve now is equality of outcome. And in order to do that, you have to take from some people, give to other people, and someone has to make the decision about what that distribution looks like. And usually those people take more money and power, as you mentioned, for themselves. And you really have to make a choice. You have to make a choice between equality of outcome and individual liberty. You cannot have both. And the left has used to try to balance those two things by creating equality of opportunity, and they sort of abandoned that to try to get equality of outcome. And in order to do that, you have to give up individual liberty and all of the rights, the God-given rights, the natural-born rights that we have as humans, as children of God, in order to achieve that. And that's where that's a part of where the left, once again, I say left me. I believe that each individual should be given the same opportunities. And also, to speak to your point, I think it's really important that people recognize that when someone who is conservative says, I don't think the government should help the poor in that way, that doesn't mean they don't believe that the government or that the poor should be helped. That does not mean that they do not help the poor themselves. What that means is that, there's nothing in the Bible that says, where Jesus says, government, you shall help the poor. What he says is to each individual that you should do everything you can to help the poor. And part of what I think has become so problematic in the United States is that we've shifted all of the power away from local communities and even states to decide what is best for the people that live in them, and ship that power away to the federal government in Washington, who has absolutely no idea what someone who's poor living in a rural area might need. And when I left being a lobbyist, I moved to Central Virginia and I bought a farm. And I had the opportunity to talk to a lot more people who I had been making policies for and about, and thinking that I knew better what was in their best interest. And it is very clear to me now that the people in Washington, D.C. don't have a clue about what most people who live outside of the Beltway actually need, want, or desire, nor do they have a clue about what most people go through, the struggles that people who are poor, and especially living in rural areas, go through, nor do they understand that a lot of people who are poor and live, and are conservative would never, ever go to the government and ask for help, because that isn't in their makeup. And so when you take money from them to give it to other people, you're hurting them. And the idea that, well, the program would be there for them if they needed it is very condescending in the first place. And in the second place is a complete misunderstanding of who these people are. They have their faith in God, they have their faith in their community, and they might turn to their community, they might go to church and ask for help, they might turn to God and pray, and they often will get the help that they need through these channels, but they would never, ever sign up to get government assistance. And that should be their right. That should be their choice. But when you take more money away from them, you're hurting their children for a program that they would never ever use, and quite frankly is not what the Bible was talking about when it says, when Jesus counseled people to help the poor.
Yeah. Oh, that was so good. There's a lot going on today, and I know we only have a few minutes because I had technical difficulties getting on. But do you have anything that you can get talked about? Do you want to talk on some really hot topics right now? Because I see, okay, the propaganda machine is in full gear. For those who don't realize, if you are watching cable or the mainstream media, it's propaganda. It's very distorted. And do you agree with that? That's what I see, Lisa.
Oh, yeah, Catherine, 100%. If for those people who might be listening who have never looked at it, take a look at Operation Mockingbird. And that was a CIA effort to place CIA-friendly reporters, and actually most of the original broadcast news owners were former military intelligence. So the idea that we have an independent media in the United States is from the get-go a little bit untrue. And all you have to do is look at the way that things are talked about on various news platforms, and they'll use the same keyword, they'll use the same buzzword, and you know that they are telling a narrative, they are not telling facts. And it is all designed to do a few things. The first one is to keep everybody afraid. It is designed to put fear into people's hearts, and it is designed to divide us from one another. So what you will see is, for example, oh, there's another shooting, and look, it's this white male terrorist that is conservative terrorist who is a shooter. Now, if the race is different on a shooter, you won't hear what that race is. It will just be, individual shots so and so, and then we'll move on. And I talk about this quite a bit in the book as an example of what you're talking about of how it is used as propaganda. And the truth is that, and this gets back to something we were talking about earlier. You can control a message by how you define the terms in your message. So, for example, if you define a mass shooting as 3 or more people who were unknown or untargeted by the assailant, it was random, then what you have is mostly the school shootings that we see, or things like that. However, if you just define a mass shooting as a shooting in which 3 or more people are injured or killed, then most of those are black on black violence that occurs by young black males. Now, why is that important? Because there's a number of reasons why it's important. Because it changes the narrative away from, trying to get at why is that occurring and how can we fix that. Most of the murders in this country are young black males being murdered by other young black males. Now that is not racist to say, it is the truth, and I have all these statistics in my book. But what it means also is that in almost all cases those guns are already illegal. So making the guns illegal will not change those statistics. Right. The other thing that is left out is that almost half of the gun deaths in the country are suicides, and most of those are white males. So what it completely changes our perception about what the danger is about gun deaths. You're talking about like less than 1% of the gun deaths are these high profile mass shootings. But you don't hear anything about all the shootings that occur in Chicago every weekend. You don't hear anything about all the shootings that occur in Philadelphia, et cetera, because the narrative is about making us afraid, making us want to take away people's rights to own a firearm that are guaranteed under the Second Amendment, that are God-given and guaranteed under the Second Amendment, and to make us fear a white conservative male. And so that is, one example that I can use, and I could sit here all day and give you examples of the propaganda. The other thing I think it's really important to keep in mind about the media, Catherine, is that the media covers something very quickly and then moves on to another thing, so that they take your attention away. So, for example, whatever happened in the Pacific Palisades to all of the land? What happened to the money that they raised to fix it? Whatever happened in Maui? Why did they close the road? Why were the schools? Where were all the children? They cover for a day or two and we're on to something else, because the media tells you what is supposed to be important and what you pay attention to, and therefore it is all designed to prevent you from digging deeper and asking the deeper questions and getting to what is the truth.
Keeping everyone completely distracted. And that's what I was trying to explain to my mother with, she unfortunately believes the propaganda, and that was, and the narrative is that President Trump is a pedophile, and to distract everyone from everything else going on, all of the treason that happened over the past several, probably decades, but we're looking at just the past few years, and there, and from all the good things that he's done. Everybody thinks that, the prices are going up because of these, the trade and everything that they're putting, the taxes that they're putting on all of our trade. Well, no, some places they found some grocery stores actually artificially raising prices, and I've seen that at gas stations too. But it's like, let's distract from all the good things that are happening in our culture, so you don't even notice. If I was somebody who worked on tips, I'd be pretty excited right now. I
think. Yeah, distraction, and if you define your reality by what you see on cable news, it's completely defining what that reality is. So if all you see is bad news, that's what you think the world is. And it really gets back to what George Orwell said, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears, believe what I am telling you. Believe what the experts and the system are telling you. I think the whole thing with the Epstein list and all of that is a really good example, because, Catherine, the Democrats made absolutely no secret that they went after Trump with everything they had. They threw everything they could. The lawfare against him was insane. And if they had this information, why didn't they use it? Why didn't they put it out there? And one might say, oh, well, he's a former president. Well, they did not respect that at all. They went after him for so many things. And so part of it is to distract from who actually is in those files, I believe, but it is also to distract from all of the good things that are happening. And I think that I think the good news is that legacy media, mainstream media, is dying.
I hope
And
so.
I really do think that it is. I think that if we can make some progress on getting big pharma to not be able to advertise anymore, I think it would completely die, because I don't know if you've ever watched, but every other ad is a drug ad on
Yeah.
so many of these news programs. And so, I mean, that gets to the point also, is how do you expect a reporter on a mainstream legacy network to be accurately reporting on medical related things when their entire existence depends on you being sick and buying big pharma's latest pill. So,
Yeah. Or injection.
or
Yeah.
injection, you know, and
Yeah.
that's, you know, that's another good example of where, when you get to define the words that you're using, you can get people to believe just about anything. So, for example, if you say you're considered unvaccinated up to 2 weeks after you are vaccinated, anything that happens in those 2 weeks is now no longer a result of the vaccine, even though that would be the period in which you'd, as a scientist, would be most likely to consider a correlation to potentially be causation, because of the temporal association, the closeness in time. And up until we had these so-called vaccines, that was always what they did. If someone were to get sick within a couple of weeks of getting a shot, they would look first to see if the shot was what did it. And in this case, they said, well, no, you're not vaccinated yet, so you count as unvaccinated, and we don't
Right.
count that. And the media went along with that and just reported the fact that it's all happening in the unvaccinated, even though, yeah.
Right.
So,
Even so, none of the heart attacks. My mother lost a cousin who could no longer walk 3 days later afterwards, and then he eventually died 10 days later. So it's like, oh no, that's within that 14 days.
oh
So
yeah,
yeah.
so they would say, nope, not vaccinated. And I see we're coming up on our time. I'm sorry, and I'd be happy
That's
to come
okay.
back.
Yes.
But I think, on the note of propaganda, what I would just encourage everyone to do, and this is what I tell everyone to do, is ask questions. Let yourself ask questions. Anyone who tells you not to do that is not looking at truth. They're looking at getting you to believe a particular point of view. So ask questions. That's one of the big things that happened on the left. If an expert says it, you can't question it. It's truth. It's gospel to them. If an expert with credentials says, expert, defined by the very people who are trying to make you believe that truth. So ask questions, and the second thing is follow the money. Who benefits from whatever it is being said, and who paid for it? Where did the money come from? Where did it go? And who's going to benefit from it? And so many times, if you just ask those simple questions, but ask other questions too, but those simple questions, and the entire narrative that the propaganda machine is trying to spin at you falls completely apart. And the whole thing is, truth, like I said, truth dies in darkness, but when you shine light on the lies, truth comes shining through. And that, I think, is what we all need to be doing, is shining our own personal light that we get from the Creator, using that light to shine light on the lies, the deception, the corruption, and the propaganda, so that everybody is aware of the truth.
Thank you so much for your time. I love that. And yes, thank you for coming back. And I'm looking forward to you coming back again with a little more time. But I really appreciate you being here today.
It was my pleasure, Catherine, and anytime, just let me know, okay?
Awesome.
All right.
So
Take
let's all
care.
think critically. Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Lisa.